Has it always been that hard to get a taxi in Dublin? Like, I'm going to concede that I don't have that much of a social life anymore, but like, has it always been that bad?
Well, I was out 2 weekends in a row now because I'm so cool these days.
You're mad yoke.
Wild. And both nights I've struggled to get home, to be totally honest. It's been a nightmare.
Like,
it was a schlep and a half, I have to say.
Jesus, there's some schlep. But like, has it always been that bad though? Like, has it always been so scarce, or is it just...
I don't know, I think I was talking to one taxi driver and he said there's definitely less taxi drivers in Dublin now, and like you would feel it. Like, I'm going to go so far as to say it would nearly put you off going out, apart from the fact that we had such a good time.
Maybe they're bringing all those people out to the airport.
I did think
so early.
The three of us got a taxi together, which we don't live near each other anymore.
Poor decision.
It was a poor decision.
It didn't work out.
But like, what else were we supposed to do when we had like no other taxis? So the three of us got a taxi together. I thought Richard would never get home. I literally...
Richard probably also thought he'd never get home.
I thought you'd never get home.
I did feel like I was being kidnapped. Like, I thought, not in a malicious way, that it was a prank sort of way. And I was like, I just want to go home.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to get to the bottom of the taxi story in Dublin, folks. Okay. The group chat demands.
Hello, you are very welcome along to this week's group chat podcast from Virgin Media News. I am political correspondent Gavan Riley, joined as ever by news correspondent Zara King.
Hello.
And Richard Chambers.
Hello.
We're going to have to start with the airport, aren't we? Like, no one sort of really wants to dive in straight to the airport, but like, the airport is the story that everyone seems to be living and breathing by, I think, because everyone has aspirations of going on holiday and no one's sure.
Well, can we just start maybe by just everyone's reaction on Sunday when you saw those pictures coming through?
Terminal 2 was where things were different for me. Because you'd seen the odd queue in Terminal 1 and you'd been hearing about it since March, but it sort of seemed like Terminal 2 had been a little bit more resilient towards the whole queuing thing. And when you see people literally queuing outside in an area where I've never seen like pedestrians on foot, like queuing up through that underpass where you drive through Terminal 2 on the way to 1, that's like, something's going wrong there.
It was great.
Get used to it, Gav.
God.
It's going to be here all summer. It's part of the plan. Yeah. But like, remember we talked about this, one of our first episodes of the group chat, we were talking about this back in March. Yeah. And I think I said at the time, it's like, this is a plan now, but the plan now will look different when summer happens. Yeah. And many, many multiples of different people will actually need to go on holidays. Yeah. So I wasn't really surprised. I was kind of... Because I like, the issues haven't gone away.
The papers have been reporting that it was all sorted just, days before that.
The CEO of the DA had written to the Oireachtas Transport Committee last Friday saying, grand lads,
up, guys.
all in hand.
Don't worry about all that stuff that used to happen.
A comment which aged terribly over the course of the weekend. Richard, you spent a lot of the last couple of days out in the airport. What was...
Tom Hanks in Terminal.
Great movie.
That's the sequel that everyone wants to see.
Chat Film Club.
What explanation are, like, because it seems like it was a bit of a perfect storm, so you can't just say that there was one single thing that caused the whole thing, but like, it seems to have been a very unfortunate and very, maybe arguably quite poorly planned series of things.
And Dublin Airport Authority, I don't know if you can say to their credit, have held up their hands and said, no, we got it badly wrong, folks.
Kind of undeniable. Like,
because they did.
That was pretty evident.
Because they did. Yeah. The situation all stems back to the pandemic. As we explained back in March, Dublin Airport Authority let go of 1,000 people during the pandemic. They didn't think that air travel would be back so quickly and so strongly as it has been. Clearly, apparently here in Ireland, everybody's mad to leave the country and get away on holidays. Or for whatever reason, business trips and all that back as well.
Island factor.
That would be it.
But I'm going to put a bookmark on that. I want to come back to that in a minute because I find that very difficult to believe.
Yes.
Yeah, and we'll all get back to that, yeah.
So they haven't filled up all the gaps there. Security staff in Dublin Airport, and if you speak to the representatives, they aren't paid particularly well in comparison to other security staff in other jobs. So if you were let go as a security staffer at Dublin Airport during the pandemic, and you've since found other job, which is probably paying you more, on better hours, on a more certain contract.
You're not going to go back.
Would you go back? Probably not.
Well, in some instances, they're probably actually debarred from going back because it would have taken a nice, or not say large, but it would have taken a significant redundancy payout. And part of the terms of that is that you can't go back to the same job then within X amount of time. So in fact, a lot of the people that they did lay off would not be allowed to go back.
And just for people who might say, well, look, they need them now, so why wouldn't they waiver that? The reality of that is then if they do allow those people to go back, you've got colleagues working side by side with people who perhaps got a payout and now they're back in the job. And
well, they are trying to get back people who were previously in the jobs. They are trying to do that.
On a 4-month basis.
4-month basis, and apparently are having trouble in actually getting people to go back. Right. But the issue was then over the weekend on Sunday, about 50,000 people, I think it was, who went through Dublin Airport. not a particularly huge amount of people. But Dublin Airport Authority says that 37 people who would have otherwise been on security weren't there. 17 of them weren't actually certified, so couldn't have been on it. So that was that's major boo-boo happened there.
So wait, they were rostered, but they weren't actually like qualified yet?
Yeah, so
yes,
basically
exactly.
they seem to have presumed that everyone who was undergoing the training would have completed the training and been certified and be ready to work by Sunday morning.
You can't build your roster. That's like us saying we're going to staff the newsroom with people who might graduate college at the end of the year.
I know of one instance of someone who had got the phone call on Sunday morning from a supervisor being like, what the hell, where are you? Like, we're swamped. Why aren't you here? And that person replying going, I have yet to complete the training.
Eligible
like,
to be here.
I cannot work for you yet.
Yeah.
I don't know how I was rostered to do so. I didn't even know I was rostered to do so because I'm not qualified to work yet.
Is that all to say then that there actually is no plan B really if somebody is sick or like there is?
Well, because there was
plan
two
B?
different categories of absences, and I think what you're asking is touches on that.
The other 20 people were just not there. They were just not there for... they were just absent from work, which is an extraordinarily high number in comparison to what it normally would be, which is about between 4 and 6 on any given day. About 250 people would normally be on security for Dublin Airport on a given day.
So to be missing 20 out of 250 for no
or having, well, effectively, if you're rostering, those 37 are people they thought they would have. If you are down 37 you thought you would have, you have a pretty big hole in the old, like, to be plugged there, and you're missing about 1,200 people being processed through security scanners an hour. So if you're adding 1,200 people to a queue every hour, that would ordinarily just be... then
it just snowballs over the course of the day.
Not good. So then 1,400 people miss flights. And people were queuing outside, all that sort of stuff. And we have our busiest weekends of the summer still to come. So that leads us to the situation of, well, we need a master plan for
How
this,
are they
don't
going
we?
to change it? The master plan, because we're recording this on Wednesday evening, and today on the Wednesday we have heard something of the master plan because it was such a big job, Richard, that you and I were both watching the Oireachtas Transport Committee as Dalton Phillips, who's the chief executive of the DAA, the Dublin Airport Authority, was explaining the master plan. And the master plan is effectively, in some circumstances, just not letting people in.
Yeah.
I know that sounds uncharitable, but that's the gist of the plan, really, isn't it?
I think the message...
Wait outside.
The message from Dublin Airport Authority to people is don't be too punctual. Don't arrive too early.
Be punctual to a point.
Yeah, I mean, there's logic to this, because actually some of the problems apparently that happened on Sunday were that people were getting the message, because this has been a continuing thing, arrive super early for your flight. Yeah. So turn up 4 hours early, or turn up three hours early for a short haul flight. Those create problems if you have people then behind you.
So people showing up, people who are flying at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, showing up at 2 because they don't want to get caught on the wrong side of the queue, because they want to be able to make their flight because they could be going on holiday or whatever, and that's an issue.
Yeah.
So now they're saying that if you show up too far in advance of your flight, that they won't let you in.
Wait right there, is what the message is. Wait right there in one of the designated holding areas, which they're going to be trialling over the next little while. So they'll be effectively standing out in the car park. Or outside in the current queuing areas, which have been set up with all the barriers outside terminal buildings.
You know what bodes well there, by the way? The fact that they're going to be putting them in the car parks, and the car parks are often oversubscribed and busy weekends anyway. So they'll be trying to set up some sort of queuing area where you have a little bit of shelter and maybe a portaloo in an area which has probably already been sold for people to park.
Yeah, you'd imagine people have booked their parking for some of their flights.
Yeah.
In like a few weeks.
And they're always pretty much like full up on a busy weekend.
I actually just realised I booked flights of the day and didn't book parking, so I will do that soon.
There you go.
Where are we going?
I'm going to Sweden for my birthday.
All right.
Oh, very nice.
Where are we going?
That sounds like where's the invite?
I'm going to be probably doing the group chat from Sweden actually on the day of my birthday.
Oh, the day of your birthday?
It's a Wednesday.
We'll have to get some, like, what's the...
We could have done it on location.
What's the interflora for cake?
Well, it's going to be midsummer, so I'm going to be wearing floral crowns.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we should break before the end of the show with SwedenGate, which has been completely overtaking social media. Have you caught that this week?
No, I feel like I'm
we're going to have a big discussion about SwedenGate in a couple of minutes. To go back to the point that we bookmarked a minute ago about their anticipation of airport traffic levels, their argument is that every credible analyst around Europe or anywhere else thought that air travel this year would be about 70 to 75% of what it was pre-pandemic, and that it would take until 2024 for it to catch up with what it previously was. Maybe that is true in other parts of the world where maybe they have a bit less of a reliance or an attachment to air travel. But as you said, Zara, the wet island factor, when we are also a relatively young population, like relative to other countries, we have so many other economic and social ties to other countries. And we've basically been landlocked for about 3 years now, given COVID lockdowns and whatnot. the idea that they thought people would not be chomping at the bit to leave
wet islands, as it's now been
and
built.
everyone has like friends and family they've not seen for years who they're keen to be reunited with. You know, travel off an island like, is not to be unexpected.
So how was it anticipated that they only thought they'd have 3/4 of the traffic?
Did they think they were all going to go on the ferry or something? Like, were they sort of thinking there was going to be an uptick?
Well, I'll tell you what, one company which did think that we were going to be back very quickly, and that is Ryanair.
Yeah.
Speaking to people in Ryanair over the last number of days, they were like, we put out press releases, we were talking very early on, whether that be last Christmas or into January of this year, that we are back and we anticipate people are going to want to get the hell out of here and want to jet off and have good holidays and all that sort of stuff.
And in fairness, Ryanair were out the gate before a lot of people. They were like, we're back, book your flights. Even at times when people were being told not to go on holidays, Ryanair were like, book your flights.
So this gets to the crux of everything then, because the airport thought that the rehiring of staff that they were doing to try and staff the security lanes and everything
wouldn't have been such a crunch issue,
Yeah, because they thought that although they might not have had a huge amount of slack, that they thought they'd have enough to cope with 3/4 of 2019's passengers. Not ever suspecting that actually the true passenger numbers would be 90 to 95%.
95, yeah. It's 95% for Terminal 1 and 85% for Terminal 2 is apparently the sort of the...
And he was saying that kind of can change from day to day, but like generally speaking, it's kind of 90% across the board, like, which is really...
But the thing about it is, and this is the point a lot of people who are in politics were saying at the committee today, and people who are analysts of the industry are saying, well, there are kind of plenty of supports that were there to try and help people keep important staff, crucial staff on the books during the pandemic.
We had the employee wage subsidy scheme, which only literally closed a couple of days ago, eWiz.
Yep.
And people we know who worked for DA were on that.
Yeah. So the point they're making is, well, if these people are so crucial, they're so highly skilled, that they are, and there's changes to the vetting process, which means it's actually more complicated to get more people in to fill those roles later on. Would you not have been better to hold as many people as possible for this role?
To which there are...
He did say they were losing $1 million a day, didn't he? So they were absolutely hemorrhaging money, and that they had absolutely no concept of when exactly the lockdowns would end and when travel would resume. And for that reason, they were really taking sort of what he almost described as emergency precautions there.
And that is, like, at the time, it did seem like a fairly sound approach because it was public money. And even though they were being subsidised with other public money, the DAA is completely owned by the state. So the idea that you would just willfully allow a state company to lose between 250 and 300 million euro. Like, would we have stood over that on the basis that, well, we need to keep these guys on a retainer for the good times to come? Like, I don't know if we would.
I think it's easy sometimes as well. Like, we have to remember, like, think back to even a year ago. Like, I mean, I would have been in the airport, you would have been in the airport doing stories and stuff at the time. I remember being in the airport during lockdown doing news stories, you know, when they were bringing in PPE, like the planes were landing in from China. And just like, I remember being in the airport thinking this is astounding, like how empty it was. And, you know, I even did a story with an air hostess at the time who had lost her job with an airline, who actually has since gone on to work in the makeup department here. And she started this week. She went into, she pivoted, I'm sure she won't mind me saying that, pivoted into makeup and started with us this week here in Virgin Media, actually. But speaking to a lot of people in aviation at that time, you know, who just really didn't know what the future would hold. And like, it's such a juxtaposition to the pictures that we're seeing now at the airport. I mean, it was astonishing how empty it was. We went out, I remember there was a Garda station, wasn't there, like a Garda station set up in the
the airport police only just opened a new outlet a couple of weeks ago.
But even, remember there was like a little stand kind of in the terminal and stuff like that, and they were checking everything coming through. Like, it was such a different time. It was completely empty, and nobody, you know, you couldn't even visualise when it would resume at that time. But in saying that, once it resumed, I think it was pretty obvious that as an island nation, we were going to want to travel again.
Well, there was one worrisome moment for me towards the end of that epic committee meeting today, which was that when they were talking through the consequences of the advice. So the advice now is you will only be admitted to the departures terminal 2.5 hours before a short-haul flight, or 3.5 hours for a long-haul flight, with an extra hour if you need to check in baggage as well. So that could mean for long-haul flights, you are now expected, or you were kind of expected to present 4.5 hours before takeoff time, which is an awful long time, particularly if you're flying early in the morning. And then it was put to them, well, have you already liaised with the airlines about this? Because the advice was, contact your airline to make sure that they're ready to take your bag. And their answer was, the airlines are generally sort of quite good, or they're workable, and particularly Aer Lingus and Ryanair are, quite good because they're our major customers, so they're quite collaborative, so we think they're okay. And that's probably okay for them for all the Ryanair flights because they're all short haul, and all okay for most of the Aer Linguses because they do a certain amount of long haul, but if they're willing to play ball, that's fine. But there's a lot of other airlines flying out of Dublin which are not Aer Lingus doing long-haul flights. And typically, you can't leave your bag with them 4.5 hours before your flight. They might only allow bag drop 2.5, 3 hours, sometimes only 2 hours before the intended takeoff time.
Yeah.
So they're encouraging you to show up 4.5 hours before the flight, and they may not be in a position to accept your bag from you at the time that they're telling you to go into the terminal, which seems like...
So then you become a person who's hovering around the sort of check-in desk.
You become an obstacle to everyone else.
Desk, yeah.
That's happening now. That's happening today. I was in the airport earlier on and we were chatting to some people who were there 6 hours ahead of time, 5 hours ahead of time. There's a group
I would just never do that, I have to say. I would just never would go
There was a group
of
of American tourists who were flying back to Boston, and they were told by their tour operator to just get down there early. And they were like, he was showing them on the phone all the scenes from the weekend. They're like, oh my God, we got to get there. So they were just sitting around. Then there was a couple of girls who were going off in J1 to Chicago then for the summer as well. Fans of the group chat as well.
Oh, lovely.
Hi, girls.
Have a
they
great
were there.
time, girls. Staying in touch with the news.
Well, I'm sure they're over there now, so I'm pretty sure they probably won't be listening to this. I hope J1s are better than you'll have to listen to the group chat podcast. I don't know how they are these days.
Well, I'm enjoying Chicago with you girls. It's lovely. Thanks for taking us with you.
People are scared and frightened that this will happen again, and I think there will be a lot of anxiety going into the weekend in spite of the plan about the diversion of staff. One more point on the situation generally in the airport before we talk about Dalton Phillips is the lack of staff is not just it's not just in the security department. There's a big complaints from a load of staff who I've been talking to over the last number of days and before this. A lot of tourists and people passing through the airports will point to it as well, is that there has been issues with cleanliness in the airports, whether that is general rubbish, whether that is toilets, whether that is staff working in concessions and food and drink. It's tough for people to get even a bottle of water when they're queuing for hours and hours over last weekend. That's why people were asking today in the committee about if people are going to be held outside during the summer waiting to get into the terminal. Is anybody going to be selling them bottles of water or sandwiches or whatever? Do you know what I mean? It's a very sensible question. So it's a difficult situation. And if you're redeploying more people from other jobs in the airport to work in security, well, then that's going to lead to a situation where people are concerned again, saying, well, is this going to make things bad in the airport? Am I going to have to bring food with me? Is that going to complicate things when I have a bottle of water and have to go through security and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, you're going back to the packed lunch, but you can't even bring the flask through security with you because it's taken off you. Although you said the flask, you said to me before about the flask, if you're making a baby's bottle, you can...
I think that maybe it was the last time that we said this, that the 100 mils limit for fluids going through hand luggage is completely ignored if you're bringing water to make up a formula for a baby's bottle. So I've never understood why they have an issue with you bringing more than 100 mils of some cosmetic or even just a bottle of water through security, when you can also bring a flask of boiling water if the circumstances allow. So it just seems
you have to produce the baby. They have to see the baby to know that you're doing it.
that baby over there, that's mine. Yeah, the little human that looks like me.
You're off gallivanting this weekend. What time are you flying at and what time will you go to the airport
I'm flying at 8:15 on Saturday morning. I'm going to England for the weekend.
This is a great... Listen to this, lads. This is a great weekend he's going on.
I'm going to Liam Gallagher in Nebworth on Saturday because I am mad for it.
Lads.
Because I am a lad.
And where are you?
And then I'm coming home on Sunday afternoon then to go and see Noel Gallagher in Dublin.
I mean, there's an equal opportunities Oasis fan.
Well, because we didn't think we were going to be able to go to Liam, so we booked the Noel tickets sort of as some sort of compensation, and then we were able to pull off Liam after all. So now I basically, if I have not got Oasis back together by next week's podcast, I will have failed you all.
I'm going to say shout out to the babysitters who are taking the two girlies.
Thank you to my parents, who are very nice. So what time am I showing up? Well, we're not going with any luggage, so we have to. I guess we're not allowed to show up before 2.5 hours before takeoff time. Okay. So it will be an interesting case study then, where if I miss my flight, if Oasis don't get back together because I miss this deployment this weekend, Dalton Phillips will be coming for you. We'll blame you.
Favourite Oasis song?
I was asked this yesterday, and I actually really struggled to think of it because I could give you any one of half a dozen.
Doesn't it? Come on.
No, it doesn't.
What?
It could be anything. It could be whatever. It could be Slide Away. It could be Some Might Say. It could be Supersonic. It could be Champagne Supernova. Or it could be Don't Look Back in Anger.
God, you're going to have a great weekend.
Don't Look Back in Anger, it could be words that Dalton Phillips lives by. As he leaves the job as DAA Chief Executive later on in the year. And it is just interesting. It's one of the talking points which sort of came to the fore during the course of the day, as everybody's very frustrated about the situation at Dublin Airport, is that he actually flew through the airport himself over the course of the weekend. He flew out to Saudi Arabia, which is, of course, where Dublin Airport Authority controversially has business interests. Yeah,
people remember the old Air Rienta, who used to be the duty-free operator. That's basically part of DAA now, and they run duty-frees all over the world, including now in Saudi Arabia, which is contentious given that country's record.
So he went through Platinum Services, which is actually a service I didn't really, like, a lot of people apparently didn't know about. It's basically, it's bit fancy is what it is. So you basically pay 300 quid.
Is it that fancy though?
Well, it's basically Terminal 3.
Chauffeur to the plane.
Well,
you have private check-in.
I've been through platinum services with the Pope once that time. And I never go on about the Pope, do I? I almost never bring that up.
Have you met the Pope?
There should be a counter for how many times you mention the
I did go through
Pope.
platinum services with the Pope that time.
Okay.
But it is, we all
So you weren't bowled over with the glamour then, no?
I wouldn't have said it was that glamorous. It's not worth the money.
Well, I think it's probably...
It's not the point, though.
No, but I think it's a certain set of circumstances. We're going in a group of press pack. It's a different setup. But so he went through that at a time when everybody... Well, not at the time, actually. That is a good point we're making. So this is on Saturday. Sunday, everybody's queuing. There's absolute chaos out there.
Yeah. So he lands and then he comes home again.
He hears there's a bit of a situation back home, and he basically turned straight back around and had to fly back to Dublin. He said now that he flew out of Platinum Services not because he was trying to avoid the queues. He said it took about an hour to get through there. So there's obviously that takes quite a long time for Platinum Services. People found that to be
hard to believe, given that Platinum Services is basically like the VVIP bit, where you're paying 300 quid to have other people even check in on your behalf. Like you literally just sit down and then they chauffeur you to the plane.
Yeah.
So how would it take an hour? Is
like the size of Platinum Services going in the door would be like walking the length of the newsroom. Like it's not really. You wouldn't be trekking anywhere going through Platinum Services.
But it's gonna be one to watch again over the summer. Like it will be interesting to see when they have to use those holding pens or areas, as they like to call them.
Yeah, so they said that they're hopeful that they won't have to do it this weekend, and I certainly hope I won't be standing in one on Saturday morning.
Live from Nebworth, 3 days after the concert with Gavan and Richard.
Doing it live on the 5:30, saying, well, I'm here, not at the airport. We do have to move on because actually we've used an awful lot of the podcast time already to discuss it, and which kind of is a useful segue, because a lot of people have been saying that they think that the story has gotten disproportionate coverage, because they would say, how come there isn't this level of wall-to-wall media coverage when health procedures get cancelled, for example, if there's some industrial action, like what you were covering, Zara, a couple of weeks ago with the medical scientists.
I would argue there's a lot of coverage when health procedures get cancelled. I mean, last week we were doing the med lab scientist strike, and I mean, like as somebody who spent the last 2 years basically exclusively covering health stories and cancellations, I would actually dispute that and say that they do get quite a lot of coverage. Do
you think then the airport has maybe gotten more than its fair share, or an unjustified amount?
Look, I think the airport just speaks to something that is really close to people's hearts in terms of if you've planned a trip and you're looking forward to spending time with your family. And, but I mean, likewise, if your medical procedure gets cancelled, that's really important too. I don't think there's I don't know, I wouldn't compare them as such. I think they're two totally different things. I think they get equal amount of coverage though.
You were describing it when we were chatting earlier, Richard, as Dublin Airport being the front door of the country, which does kind of mean that it's sort of warranted when you can't get out of it.
But it is. But if it's in terms of scale, it most obviously is. And people do travel from across the country to use Dublin Airport. Whether the logistics of that situation makes sense anymore, probably going to be looked at. But if it's the front door of the nation, is banging off its hinges. Not a great look, like, do you know what I mean? So obviously there's going to be a lot of attention to that particular situation. But yeah, no, there's a point in there somewhere about focus on things. But I do think that generally, like, health matters and important things are covered appropriately.
I would definitely argue that health stories get plenty of coverage on those.
Final note before we do move on, I did like that at the Oireachtas committee today, somebody finally asked the question of, could you send in the army and would there be any help? And the answer was no. They would not be any help because they are not trained. They don't have the security clearance to go on the air side. All they could do on land side is help you put your laptop in a bag, which would not be of very much use. That's not where the bottleneck is. One story which did get a decent amount of coverage, actually, although maybe sort of those who were affected by it would probably think that it deserved an awful lot more, was that story during the week about children with autism who cannot find school places. And one of the government's solutions, which they said was short-term, was to create some sort of special education centres where those children would basically find... I don't know what they had in mind. People's notions of it or people's images were basically prefabs on greenfield sites where... in lieu of there being mainstream school places for these pupils, that they would be in some sort of extra temporary setting. Now, the parents
just segregating those children from everybody else. Yeah,
well, this was the argument of As I Am, the autism advocacy charity, and also of a lot of the parents of autistic children who basically said, no, like this is completely not on. This is like enforced segregation of our children. What we want is for them to be taught, maybe not necessarily in a mainstream class, but in an ASD class in a mainstream setting. And they felt like that was completely anathema to that. And also bearing in mind that there's been previous interim solutions or temporary arrangements, like, for example, direct provision, which the last three governments have all been trying to dismantle one way or another, which was a temporary solution when they set it up in the year 2000. They thought that, we wouldn't be able to go on holiday to Mosney for a couple of years and that it would be back. and it's been 22 years.
So what we're saying is often the lessons learned here is that temporary becomes quite permanent in Ireland. One of the key factors, I think, for a lot of these families, though, Gavin, is the idea of getting the diagnosis in the first place, because the key thing is early intervention. But by the time you sort of get the diagnosis, if you go through the public system, you've missed the boat in terms of early intervention.
It is wild. And to think that the government is only now the state, and to be fair, Josepha Madigan deserves some credit because she says that she is the first minister who has ever tried to do something of a stock take of what demand there is for services for autistic children and what sort of educational provision they need. And obviously the first step is acknowledging how many people you've got. But how they were in some way surprised that there would be a shortage of places, I don't know, because when you compare the places that there are in ASD classes in primary versus the places that there are in ASD classes in secondary, like there is a massive mismatch. Like in Dublin, for example, in some parts, there are 10 times more primary places for children with autism than there are secondary. And I don't know what the state envisaged, but I don't know whether that's by accident or design, whether they just put resources into primary and now they're trying to play catch up in secondary, or whether they thought the children's educational needs would just diminish over time.
So like as in, so are you saying that there's a situation then where kids are coming out of having all those supports in primary school in 6th class, they spend the summer holidays and they go back into first year and they have absolutely no support?
Because basically there's only about 1/10 of the number of places available for children at second level who might need to be in an ASD specific class. And why the state has allowed that to be designed in that way, I just can't fathom at all. But to go back to your point about the timing for the assessment, this in a way is crucial to everything. And this actually goes beyond autistic children, because this goes to children who might just need other speech and language therapies or who maybe need audiology services. The gateway to that whole process is something called an assessment of need, which you are usually referred to by a community doctor when the child is around about 2 years old. It used to be sometime between 18 months and 2 years, but with COVID, it's now always at the later end of that. And I think legally speaking, if you are referred for an assessment of need, you're supposed to get it within 3 months. And after COVID now, the waiting period for an assessment of need is an average, I think, of 17 months.
Jesus.
So if you go to a doctor age 2 and you think you're worried that your child has some developmental issue or that they might be neurodiverse or that you want to get them assessed in one way or other, you send them for an assessment of need. It now could be before the child is 3.5, before their needs are assessed. And it could be a period after that then before you were given a confirmed diagnosis and they say, okay, yes, we believe that your child is ASD or might be on the spectrum and could benefit from these therapies. But when you think about how oversubscribed the autism classes in primary school are anyway,
generally speaking,
that basically by the time you've gotten an official diagnosis from the state, you may have already missed the boat to get them into an ASD class in primary school, because the enrolment has to be done in the October before the September they're starting. So you basically need to know that the child is autistic 12 months before you intend to bring them into the school. And that's like the last possible moment for you to get into an ASD class. And most kids just aren't getting the diagnosis. If you wait in the public system, the public system will not give you your diagnosis until the ship has sailed for all of that, let alone the early intervention units, which are sort of a specialised preschool, which are intended to be the best practice for autistic children, to try and help them, integrate into a mainstream setting. Completely closed off.
The sad reality of this, though, is that then it comes down to money, doesn't it? Whether you can afford to pay or if you can't. It's the haves and have-nots.
Yeah,
and that's what's really wrong about all of this, is that actually, and some parents go into debt, they take out loans, they want to do the best for their kids to get them the diagnosis, get them the early intervention, and actually it's a total lottery in terms of whether you can afford to have it or not, and that's what's wrong about it.
Yeah, and which is even worse again, but well, not even worse, but that the families who have the means to do that, then if they want to try and refer their child for private speech and language therapy or private occupational therapy, it's now getting very difficult to find those therapies, by all accounts, because there is now such a demand, because so many people can no longer afford to wait for the private system that they have to, or the public system, that they have to go private, which then creates a bottleneck in the private system, which means even those who are paying out are only getting therapies in about as timely a way as they might have done under the public system before all this bottlenecked up. So it's a gargantuan thing. It has got a reasonable amount of coverage. I think that it's something that was worth dwelling on for a couple of minutes because of just the scale of the problem and how structurally it is so difficult to get on top of all of that.
And I would say as well, like not a week goes by where, and you're probably the same, where we don't get a message from a family going through that.
Oh, completely.
100%.
It is. And it's so commonplace, and it actually does speak to just a massive failure that this is something that has been so consistent, that this has been such an issue for such a long time. And that, the solutions to it are just causing everybody to just scratch their head and be like, where's
How
the
is
priority here?
segregation the answer, though?
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, yeah, and Josefa Madigan gave an answer, which was that if your child does not already have a space in a mainstream school,
Better than no place at all.
well, the chances are that they're already receiving some sort of home tuition grant, so they're already de facto segregated. So this way, they'd just be segregated with other autistic children, which I don't think went down in the open-minded way in which she might have intended it. But it's just a huge issue. And one final moment before we do move on about it. People may remember a couple of months ago, there was a story broken in the Irish Examiner that Anne Rabbitte, who is the Minister responsible for Disability Services, as distinct to special education, which is Josefa Madigan, she was looking for meetings with the HSE to try and discuss the blockages to the system, the delays in getting assessments of need, the coordination of services, and what could be done to try and speed all of that up. And the HSE basically acted as a gatekeeper to stop her from meeting those teams one-on-one. They said that she could meet them all in plenary, have a Zoom chat with each of them, but that they wouldn't have time to do it one-on-one. So even the ministers who are trying to clear down the bottlenecks are just unable to do. Which is a depressing note, but such is life for an awful lot of vulnerable people in the country today. And speaking of the expense that all those people are incurring, they're going to be doing probably an awful lot of driving to and from a lot of the appointments that they're going to need. And that's going to get dearer as well because of some of the changes that were made this week about the supply of oil. Because now it seems that although Ireland is not too dependent on Russian oil, we have now adopted EU embargoes, which mean that we're not going to be, no one else is going to be taking very much Russian oil either, which is going to push prices up, which means that even if you can't queue up in the airport or you couldn't get a passport, if you're going on a staycation, if you're going on a road trip, that's going to get dearer too.
We've already hit the €2.
Oh, it's
If you're driving around,
petrol is really that it's a very symbolic thing when the government has already tried to take 15 or 20 cent off the excise.
Yeah, and you're still hitting the €2 thing. I don't know. I've nothing to say. I'm just looking at it tick away every day when I'm driving for work, and it's just like, wow, this is
But
like I drive a Volkswagen Beetle, and like it's a diesel car, and like it's nearly costing €100 to fill it now. A Volkswagen Beetle, like €100.
It's not a very big car.
Now, when I used to drive a 2-litre petrol Beetle before, which was so ridiculous, and like that used to cost a fortune, which I didn't really mind anyway because it was fine. But you think when you kind of like buy the diesel car that it's going to be whatever, but no, it's costing about €100 to fill it.
Well, and the more salient point about all of this is that the Taoiseach, when he was speaking in Brussels, where this Russian oil embargo was agreed, and again, Ireland is not a huge consumer of Russian oil, but a lot of other countries are, which means that the general price of oil in world markets is going to go up as a result of this. That if we hoped that €2 a litre was going to be some sort of temporary surge and that eventually things would abate, maybe the situation in Ukraine would resolve in some satisfactory way. Now it's basically not going to, is the Taoiseach's assessment, and that this is going to be the new normal, which for an awful lot of people is going to be the difference between whether they can make their livelihoods work or not. Like hauliers who now are going to be paying €2 a litre for diesel basically in perpetuity. Like it's no wonder that everything else is going to get dearer because everyone consumes fuel. And every product needs to be driven from A to B by some haulier. And it's just not going to get any cheaper. Yeah,
and I suppose like it's a conversation for another week. We'll get into another week. But it's, wages aren't going up is the other issue as well. So, cost of living is going up, but people aren't getting paid more money.
Yeah. And moreover, that the government says that it's not going to be able to do anything more for people to deal with the rising cost of fuel or anything else until the budget, which seems like a long way away, even though we're now in June, but it's 4.5 months away. And often a lot of the things that are announced in the budget don't take effect at the budget. They might only take effect the following January or even sometime into spring. So people are going to be, I suspect that's going to be a big political issue, that when people get over maybe the something of a distraction of the airport, or when those problems do resolve themselves, we're going to be going back to, hang on, why is it so dear to just drive from A to B, particularly in rural Ireland? Particularly
post-summer as well. You're already seeing even more electricity hikes over the last number of days announced. So, I mean, those are really going to sting once you get past the summer months. So I think it's not even been on the back burner and we're only at the start of the summer. I don't think it's going to go away for the summer, but it is certainly, logically, you would see it really, really hitting home and hitting hard to an even stronger degree in terms of fuel and home heating really after the summer months. So I think that's one we're going to have to keep an eye on. A
few other bits of news in brief. The number of Ukrainians coming to Ireland. Zara, you were actually at a press conference today Wednesday, when we're recording this, with Heather Humphreys, who was talking about the number of Ukrainians who've now arrived here?
Yeah, so Heather Humphreys, the Social Protection Minister, is telling us today that 3,500 Ukrainians have now secured full-time employment in Ireland. So various different jobs, loads of different sectors. But yeah, so 35,000, just under 35,000 people have now been given PPS numbers. 11,000 are in receipt of child benefit. 17,500 are in receipt of some kind of financial support from the state. And the Minister saying that she's met around 7,000 Ukrainians who've been to jobs fairs and different sort of schemes like that to try and help them find employment. So today I was at Fish, which is a training centre in Glasnevin in Dublin. It's sort of a centre where people can go, Ukrainian people can come and train up for various different jobs in the IT sector. But they're also offering English language courses, because I suppose the one thing that the Minister said today was that it is the language barrier that is a huge factor for people in terms of securing that employment. So there's going to be opportunities for people to take on those courses as well. We can take a quick listen to what Heather Humphreys had to say this afternoon.
We have said very clearly from the onset that we're not putting a limit on the number of people that's coming to come into Ireland, and we'll continue, in that vein.
But I suppose if the accommodation isn't adequate, though, Minister, is it fair for us to, albeit offer someone refuge, but not the right type of refuge?
Well, we will do everything we can to make sure that the accommodation that we are providing is of a good quality and a good standard. When I spoke to the Ukrainians that I met in Listu and Varna, they could not believe the quality of the accommodation that they had received in Ireland, and they were very happy with it. And as I said earlier, the main thing they want are the clear skies. They see clear skies. There are no bombs here. There's no bullets coming at them. And that's the most important thing.
So look, that was just Heather Humphreys actually speaking in relation to the accommodation situation. So we were asking her today, look, are we still going to keep the doors open in terms of welcoming people if we can't offer them adequate accommodation? She's obviously saying that, look, they're doing the
living in
best they
City
can.
West isn't necessarily adequate for everyone.
Yeah, so the government has signed on to take City West now for 2 years. So yeah, so it's an interesting. She's saying the doors remain open. Look, they're offering people refuge. So at the end of the day, Ireland is still a safer place for people to be at this point in time.
I did a call for questions earlier this evening on Instagram, asking people if there was anything they wanted to hear us talk about. A strangely universal answer was, "Are we going to be watching Love Island?" To which I don't know about your answers, but mine is a hearty yes.
You're the one who got me into Love Island.
Well, actually, that is a fact. That is a fact.
Was it me?
Yeah,
I got you into it.
I think you did, yeah.
You did. You and Deborah Naylor.
Okay, well, it's just.
But there was a time in this
complain.
newsroom where you couldn't work here without watching Love Island because everyone was constantly talking about it.
It was the wonderful summer of 2019 when I think Love Island hit its...
the Jack and Danny summer.
Jack and Danny, Ovi... no, was it Amber and...
Greg and Amber was...
I got into it the year of
Higgins.
Jack and Danny. So what year was that? That was...
That was
that one.
was 2018.
No, sorry, that's not. It's 2018.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
We've done a great job there. But 2019 was the best year, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
2018 actually was the one we got into, but 2019 was...
Do you think that was the best one?
it's an iconic cast.
I think it's interesting
The Greg O'Shea year.
Well, not particularly because of him.
He came in really at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but there was a good mix there. If you look who's still in the headlines, it's that cast of 2019.
Well, it's more Higgins, in fairness, for she's still rocking
Molly
it.
May, Haig and Tommy
May
Fury.
did great out of it. Yeah, they've all done really well out of it.
Whichever year was the OV
Curtis
year.
and is making
and AJ
getting up early in the morning to make coffee for everyone, so everyone's ready for the morning.
He's now bringing that shtick to
Curtis,
Hollyoaks.
the dancing guy.
Yeah.
God, I'd forgotten about him.
A veteran of Dancing with the Stars.
Yes,
before he went
of
to it, did
course.
that.
Yeah.
One thing which I always kind of found slightly disappointing is that there's been series subsequent to Ovi being in there. And you know how it's become canon that whenever they get a text from the producers that they have to announce it with a certain cadence. Like it has to be, got
a text, yeah.
But for a whole year, it was canon that Ovi would have to respond to every one of those with message. And I think it's actually a crying shame. It's staying it's disrespecting Ovi's legacy. That every other
Where's
text...
the continuity?
Every other text is not followed with that kind of acknowledgement of the message.
Respect those that have gone before.
But you remember the Winter Love Island? It didn't really... Was the Winter Love Island the cast of that didn't really get the same because the pandemic had kind of just happened?
No, it was just before the pandemic.
That's what I'm saying. It happened, the show aired, then the pandemic happened, and those cast members didn't get their club appearances or their run out per se after that.
Also, it didn't feel like the sort of luxurious escape that it was supposed to be because it was in South Africa.
And we still watched it.
And but it was wildly windy. So like everywhere they were sitting, their hair was blowing all over the place.
That is true, actually, yeah.
Before we wrap up, because I didn't plan to bring this up, SwedenGate. You haven't come across SwedenGate.
No. I told you I'm not on Twitter anymore.
It has become basically viral in the last couple of days that Swedish people, if they have a guest in their home, will not feed that guest.
That's not been my experience.
Apparently the working basis is that if you are like over with, if you have a play date with a friend and that friend will be like called downstairs and they will expect you to sit in that friend's room, sitting there not eating while the rest of the family is downstairs. Or if you go on a sleepover, you don't get breakfast with them the following morning.
Absolutely not a lived experience.
Apparently their basis is that they are so sensitive of what your own family might be doing, that they don't want to ruin the breakfast that you might have when you go home by giving you another breakfast to throw with all that out.
Where is this coming from? I don't even know.
This apparently was the universal experience of people who've been to Sweden.
I love it.
Except not for you.
Not my lived experience in Sweden at all. Although I suppose in saying that, most, like, my family are Swedish and Irish, so I suppose there's a bit of a mix. No, like, Swedish people love fika, like, which is basically coffee and cake every, like, 3 or 4 hours. They love a fika. And, like, it's very common in Sweden, like, that you call somebody for fika, like, and they have, like, fresh cakes and everything. Do you hate the word fika, do you?
No, I just find the idea of SwedenGate, I had no idea what was coming there. I just found that absolutely abnormal.
I feel like it's just not true. Like, I mean, every time I go to anyone's house...
If this is something that's just been made up on the internet, it's one of the best things that's ever just been made up on the internet.
Every time I go to anyone's house in Sweden, I've always found the hospitality to be nothing but top-notch.
Swedish ambassador on next week to explain himself.
Well, we're going to send you off as our field reporter. When you're off to Sweden for midsummer, then you can tell us about whether fika is shared universally.
Well, listen, 2 weeks' time.
We'll put you off in deployment. That is all the time that we have on this week's group chat. Thank you very much for everyone who has listened or downloaded. Please do leave a rating on whatever platform it is you're listening, and if you can leave a comment on whatever platform that is, please do that as well. And we will see you back same time next week. So until then, goodbye from Richard Chambers.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from Zara King.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. Goodbye.